The rain drummed steadily against Harold Matthews' windshield as he navigated the unfamiliar Vermont backroads, his GPS struggling to maintain signal among the dense trees. 3 wrong turns and a near miss with a startled deer had already tested his city-hardened nerves. The lawyer's directions had seemed simple enough. Follow Road 7 north, turn at the old miller's store, look for the gate with the copper weather vane. But at the gathering dusk, every rustic storefront looked the same, and every gate held the promise of being his Uncle Gerald's final gift. When Harold finally spotted the weather vane, a handcrafted fox forever chasing its copper tail, something caught in his throat. He hadn't seen it since he was 12, during those precious summer visits before adult life swept him into its current. Now, at 45, with his corporate accounting career in shambles, and his Boston apartment stripped to bare essentials, that same fox seemed to mock him with its endless pursuit of nothing. The gate's ancient hinges protested as Harold pushed it open, his dress shoes, still habitually polished despite 3 months of unemployment, immediately surrendering to the mud. 20 acres, the lawyer had said. 20 acres of Vermont woodland, complete with a private road that wound through the property like a lazy river. Uncle Gerald, the eternal bachelor and local eccentric, had left everything to his only nephew, the quiet boy, who'd once spent an entire summer helping him build birdhouses. Harold trudged up the road, each step carrying him further from the life he'd lost. The marketing firm's downsizing had been clinical: a Thursday morning meeting, a cardboard box, a security escort. 15 years of loyalty reduced to a severance package and a LinkedIn recommendation. His savings, once a proud testament to his financial prudence, had dwindled to anxiety-inducing numbers. The old farmhouse emerged from the mist like a ghost ship, its weathered clapboards and slate roof unchanged by time. On the covered porch, a rocking chair swayed gently in the wind, as if Uncle Gerald had just stepped inside for a moment. Harold found the key exactly where the lawyer described, under a false bottom in the old milk can by the door. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and leather, of old books, and the coffee his uncle had always brewed strong enough to stand a spoon in. Everything was exactly as Harold remembered, yet somehow smaller, more intimate. His uncle's reading glasses still lay on the roll-top desk, next to a leather-bound journal and a stack of carefully preserved documents. Harold picked up the journal, its pages filled with his uncle's precise handwriting. The first entry caught his eye. A man's land is his legacy, but a road is his connection to the world. Choose wisely who you let travel it. As Harold sank into his uncle's favorite armchair, the rain outside steadied to a gentle rhythm, and for the first time since losing his job, he felt the stirring of possibility. Perhaps this inheritance wasn't just a property. Perhaps it was a second chance. The first invasion came at dawn. Harold was nursing his morning coffee on the porch, watching chickadees raid his uncle's old feeder, when the rumble of engines shattered the peace. 3 Mercedes SUVs barreled down his private road, spattering mud across the freshly fallen leaves. The drivers, faces illuminated by their phones, didn't even glance his way. By afternoon, the trickle had become a flood: Range Rovers, BMWs, even a Maserati, all treating his family's road like their personal expressway to Mountain Vista Estates. Harold's polite emails to the Homeowners Association went unanswered. His private property signs, carefully mounted on cedar posts, disappeared within days. The next set lasted 12 hours. The third set, reinforced with security cameras, captured footage that made his hands shake with rage. Karen Whitmore, president of the Mountain Vista HOA, methodically removing each sign at midnight, her pearl necklace gleaming in the infrared light as she tossed them into her Mercedes trunk. The confrontation was inevitable. Karen appeared at his door on a crisp October morning, clipboard in hand, and 2 men in suits hovering behind her like expensive shadows. Harold recognized one as James Patterson, the developer who transformed the nearby hillside into a maze of identical luxury homes. Mr. Matthews. Karen's voice dripped artificial sweetness. We need to discuss the road situation. She wore the same patronizing smile he'd seen on his former boss's face during the layoffs. The community has drafted a petition to designate your road as a public thoroughfare. It's really quite generous. We're offering compensation. Harold studied the document she thrust forward. The generous compensation amounted to less than 2 months of his former salary. His uncle's words from the journal echoed in his mind. Choose wisely who you let travel it. This road has been private property for 4 generations. Harold kept his voice steady. My uncle spent his life maintaining it. Times change, Mr. Matthews. Patterson stepped forward, cashmere coat fluttering in the autumn breeze. Progress demands adaptation. The council's already reviewing our proposal. They understand the needs of the broader community. The broader community? Harold's laugh held no humor. You mean your development's property values? Karen's smile tightened. We'd hate to see this become difficult. Legal battles are so expensive these days, especially for someone in your current situation. The threat hung in the air like wood smoke. Through his kitchen window, Harold could see his uncle's journal on the table, its pages filled with decades of careful documentation. They thought him weak, a redundant accountant hiding in his uncle's shadow. But they hadn't counted on Gerald's foresight, or his nephew's growing determination to honor it. Get off my property. Harold's voice was quiet but firm. And take your petition with you. This road isn't for sale. As their vehicles retreated down his road, Harold realized the real battle was just beginning. In his study, he opened his laptop and typed, Property Rights Attorneys, Vermont. It was time to fight back. The local newspaper's headline felt like a physical blow. Selfish landowner blocks community progress. Harold stared at his own photo, grainy and unflattering, beneath the bold text. The article painted him as a stubborn hermit, clinging to outdated property rights, while the vibrant Mountain Vista community suffered. Karen Whitmore was quoted extensively, describing how children were forced to take longer routes to school and emergency vehicles were unnecessarily delayed. All lies but compelling ones. Sarah Chen's law office occupied a converted Victorian house in downtown Burlington, its purple door a defiant splash of personality among the staid professional buildings. The young attorney's desk bore a framed photo of a small farm, its edges worn with handling. They took it through eminent domain when I was 12, she explained, following Harold's gaze. Said a shopping mall would serve the greater good. It went bankrupt 2 years later. She lifted Uncle Gerald's journal with careful hands. But your uncle, he was brilliant. These records, the surveys, the maintenance logs, he knew this day would come. They worked late into the night, poring over Gerald's meticulous documentation. The road's history unfolded like a novel, land grants from the 1800s, carefully preserved easement agreements, annual maintenance records detailed down to the last load of gravel. Gerald had even photographed every improvement, creating a 4-decade timeline of careful stewardship. But the HOA fought dirty. Harold's mail began disappearing. His garbage cans were overturned nightly. Anonymous emails promised to make him see reason. The final straw came when he found his uncle's weather vane, the copper fox that had watched over the gate for decades, twisted and broken on the ground. The council meeting was scheduled for the following week. Karen's legal team had submitted a thick brief arguing adverse possession and public necessity. They'd even hired a PR firm to plant human interest stories about residents affected by the road crisis. They're getting desperate, Sarah observed, spreading documents across Harold's kitchen table. Look at these property assessments. Without your road, their next phase of development loses half its value. Patterson's over-leveraged. He needs those sales. Harold rubbed his tired eyes. The fight was draining his severance pay, and the constant stress had left him sleeping poorly. But each morning, he read another page of his uncle's journal, finding strength in the old man's wisdom. Gerald had spent his life protecting this land, understanding its value beyond mere dollars. We need something conclusive, Sarah muttered, deep in thought. Their whole case rests on necessity and historical use. If we could prove. She stopped suddenly, staring at a faded blueprint poking from beneath a stack of surveys. Harold, when did they submit the original development plans? As she pulled the document free, her eyes lit up with the fierce joy of a warrior finding a sword. "Oh, they're going to regret underestimating us," she whispered, reaching for her phone. "Get some coffee. We're going to be here all night." In his study, the broken weather vane caught the lamplight, its copper surface still bearing traces of its original beauty. Harold picked it up, feeling its weight. Tomorrow, he would have it repaired. Some things were worth fighting for, worth preserving. His uncle had understood that. Now, finally, so did he. The town hall's meeting room buzzed with tension. Every seat was filled, with Mountain Vista residents standing along the walls, their designer clothes and imperious expressions a sharp contrast to the room's weathered wood paneling. Karen Whitmore sat in the front row, flanked by her legal team, her victory smile reflected in her perfectly polished pearls. Harold's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his uncle's bolo tie, the one Gerald had worn to every important occasion. Sarah Chen stood beside him, her purple blazer a defiant splash of color in the sea of corporate grays. On her tablet, drone footage waited like a loaded gun. The council chairman called the meeting to order, his gavel cutting through the murmur of voices. Patterson's attorneys went first, their presentations slick with professional graphics and rehearsed empathy. They showed photos of school buses taking the long route, testimonials from residents, charts of projected community growth. Karen dabbed at invisible tears during a particularly dramatic segment about emergency response times. Then Sarah stood up. Her voice, clear and steady, filled the chamber. "Before we continue," she said, "I'd like to present new evidence." The drone footage played on the large screen, a hidden valley behind Mountain Vista Estates, thick with construction debris and abandoned equipment. This is the site of the originally approved access road, the one Mountain Vista was legally required to build before selling a single home. The room erupted in whispers. Sarah continued, methodically laying out their case: the original permits, the bond agreements, the signed contracts promising completion before occupancy, and finally, internal emails from Patterson's company discussing how to force Harold's hand. The old man's nephew won't have the resources to fight back. Once we get his road, we can skip the expensive construction altogether. Karen's smile cracked. Patterson, his face purple, started whispering furiously to his lawyers, but the killing blow came from an unexpected quarter. A young man in a Mountain Vista Estates polo shirt stood up, Patterson's former project manager, clutching a USB drive full of doctored inspection reports and falsified completion certificates. The council's deliberation took less than an hour. The verdict was unanimous. Harold's road would remain private. Mountain Vista Estates was ordered to complete the original access road within 6 months, under penalty of severe fines. 1 year later, Harold stood at his gate, the restored copper fox gleaming in the morning sun. The new access road had diverted most traffic away, but a steady stream of cars still passed through his gate, each paying a reasonable fee for the privilege. The proceeds funded the Gerald Matthews Nature Preserve, where his uncle's restored barn now hosted environmental education programs for local schools. Karen had resigned from the HOA and sold her house at a loss. Patterson's company faced multiple investigations, and Harold, he'd found his calling managing the preserve, his accounting skills perfectly suited to balancing conservation with controlled access. That morning, as he sipped coffee on his porch, a familiar Mercedes slowed at his gate. Karen's replacement on the HOA board, now paying handsomely for access rights, waved politely as she passed. Harold waved back, hiding his smile behind his mug. His uncle's journal lay open beside him, and he'd recently started adding his own entries. Today's read simply, "Sometimes, justice comes with a view, and it's best enjoyed slowly, like a fine Vermont morning." The copper fox caught the sunlight, still chasing its tail, but now it seemed to be laughing too.